Hey friends, today we're talking about the astrology for Monday, December 9th, going all the way to Sunday, December 15th, 2024. There are some very huge, exciting new developments to talk about for this week. And before we talk about those, I just want to give a little bit of context, from as to like where we just came from, and then we'll talk about the aspects for this week. So last week was easily one of the darkest weeks of the year, and I mean that both literally as well as figuratively. Being this close to the solstice and just coming off of that new moon, we experienced, depending on when you're watching this, like 1 to 2 weeks ago, combining those two elements together definitely created one of the darkest weeks of the year. And so now things are definitely changing. Going into this week, we just had a third quarter moon, I believe, on Sunday. And so, yeah, on Sunday, December 8th, this is actually the chart for that day. So technically, this is one day before what we would usually cover for the week's forecast. But I just wanted to show you one thing. So looking at this chart compared to the end of the week that I'll show in just a moment, basically what I'm getting at is we're gearing up for a full moon that's going to be happening on Sunday, December 15th. And usually what would happen as we approach a full moon is that things get more exciting, but also more contentious. There's more activity. And in a way that's still true here, but there is a huge difference because for this week, comparing the chart for the day before, basically comparing Sunday, December 8th to Sunday, December 15th, you can see the difference with the aspects. There are so many more harsh aspects with Sunday, December 8th compared to Sunday, December 15th. So in general, it looks like things are actually getting a little bit harmonious as we get more light from the moon, if that makes sense. So yeah, we're still going through Mercury retrograde. By the way, that is ending this week as well. Both Mercury and Mars are kind of stationary this week, but for different reasons. Mars has just recently stationed retrograde in Leo, and Mercury is about to station direct in Sagittarius. So there are huge changes going on, and to be totally honest with you, I really do think I underestimated, months ago when I was looking at the astrology for November and December. I do think I underestimated how strong these changes would be right now. And the reason why is because these aren't the most like flashy, super outgoing types of changes. I think things are changing in a really powerful way, but much of it is dark in nature. Much of it is subconscious or psychological. But anyway, enough of that. Let's actually get into the day-by-day forecast and look at some aspects here. So starting off the week with Monday, December 9th, moon will actually start off in Pisces and it will cross Neptune in the morning Eastern Standard Time. But you can see by noon, moon has already just recently entered Aries. And so many of us will experience much of the day with moon in Aries, which would typically be pretty out of place. However, because the sun is in Sagittarius, moon entering Aries, a fellow fire sign, tends to blend very well. So in other words, sun and moon are both in fire signs. They are roughly in agreement. They're not exactly trining yet by aspect, but they're at least in signs that trine one another. So plus we have moon crossing over north node about halfway through the day, Eastern Standard Time as well. So yeah, I really do think this means, well, we're at a turning point, and again, that's kind of consistent all week, really. But even just the position of the moon kind of aligns with that as well. Typically with sun and moon and fire signs, that would indicate a lot of activity, momentum, and yes, that may be true in some way, but again, having both Mercury and Mars basically stationary at this point, not really moving much at all, it just indicates that things are very intense right now. We are putting a lot of, it's like there's a lot of weight, there's a lot of pressure on everything that we're kind of doing and thinking right now. So yeah, I think that we've had a lot of self-reflection recently, and it looks like that definitely continues. It's strange because having so many planets, especially, these like personal placements, sun, Mercury, Mars, moon, having all of those in fire signs would typically be super, happy-go-lucky, super carefree, just very impulsive. But really, that's not what I'm seeing at all right now. Having, again, Mercury and Mars both basically stationary or close to stationary. Again, there's just like a huge weight on like we're still exploring that individuality and exploration, but in a much heavier, kind of deeper and internal type of way, if that makes sense. Going to Tuesday, December 10th, moon continues through Aries. It will actually cross over Chiron today. Also, moon does make that exact trine by aspect to the sun. Looks like in the afternoon Eastern Standard Time. And at the same exact time, sun will be trining Chiron. So that's actually pretty funky. So in other words, moon conjunct Chiron right as well, okay, to really split hairs, technically moon trines sun and sun trines Chiron. But you could basically just say moon is conjunct Chiron, and moon and Chiron are both involved in a trine with the sun at the same time. Okay, so this is a funky one. Usually I wouldn't give a whole lot of weight to aspects involving Chiron, but because the moon just happens to be there at the same time, it's really highlighting Chiron and channeling that energy. So that basically means that we're channeling something up from our subconscious, like it may be some kind of past wound or trauma, but we're wanting that kind of self-exploration, and we're looking for empathy. There's increased empathy with Chiron aspects like this, and I always say, like, in theory, that sounds really great. Especially those of us that are into astrology, like that's what we would want, right? We want increased awareness of ourselves and others. That sounds really awesome. But in practice, it definitely can be good, don't get me wrong, but it's also very awkward. Chiron aspects are awkward. I think it can be awkward, like having an increased level of empathy, especially with like strangers, like if we're not used to it. I think we're just not all ready for that. Like I don't think I am. It can be, it's like we're all like a little bit more sensitive, I think, with these types of aspects, and more aware of our own pain and each other's pain. Like, things like insecurities that we usually would, maybe just kind of like brush over. Maybe it's not always necessary to explore those in every little interaction. Those things are like very at the surface, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So yeah, it can be awkward. Not just awkward, but people can really get triggered because they might feel exposed. Maybe they're not used to that. Maybe they don't want that, and that's fair. So yeah, that can be actually very tense, depending on how we go about embracing this energy. On the other hand, though, this can be an excellent aspect when it comes to, if we're open to having those kind of deep conversations. And like, for instance, if you go to therapy, this would be the best day to speak to like a therapist or counselor, or if you wanted to have like a deep talk with your significant other and just kind of, I don't know, have a constructive talk about some really heavy issues. It's very psychological, this aspect. It's very therapeutic, but again, some of us might not be going to therapy. Maybe we're not even open to that. And then that's where it could get awkward or contentious. The last thing I'll say about that too is that Chiron in Aries is volatile. Chiron is retrograde here, so that does make a difference. But still, Chiron's been in Aries since 2018, and since that time there's been a lot of protests, and people have been triggered and offended, and we've seen the rise of cancel culture. So yeah, we can be triggered. I guess I kind of covered that already, but so yeah, there could be like kind of fights or things boiling over, but at the same time there could also be really constructive, deep conversations as well. It just kind of depends. Okay, going to Wednesday, December 11th, moon continues through Aries, and then like almost exactly halfway through the day Eastern Standard Time, like right at noon, moon will leave Aries and enter Taurus. And of course, moon is exalted in Taurus, so generally you can't really go wrong with moon going through Taurus. Keep in mind too that we are still approaching the full moon. So at this point, the moon it's really getting traction. It appears pretty full. It doesn't appear full in the sky quite yet, but it's a waxing gibbous moon, so it's definitely more full, definitely more than halfway full. So there's a lot of meaning behind that. There's a lot of energy, there's a lot of light, and again, we may not even be used to this because it was just so dark last week, but that's great. I mean, Well, even that in itself has its kind of pros and cons, just like everything, I guess. But, going through that dark period, again, I think we've had a lot of we've had an opportunity to really reflect a lot on ourselves. So now that the moon is getting light or gaining light, we're really seeing how much more self awareness that we have or that others have compared to just a couple weeks ago. Which, yeah, again, that's one of those things where that can be super cool and exciting and a lot of fun, but it can also be painful, or we might even feel exposed. But overall, I do think it'll be nice having the moon get a little bit more light, getting a little bit more energy, just because things have felt so kind of vacant recently. Thursday, December 12th. Moon continues through Taurus, gaining light, gaining traction. Things are getting a little bit more active, a little bit more energetic, even more so than, you would think that Moon in Aries would be more volatile and active, right? And yeah, to some extent that's true. But again, you have to keep in mind like the phase of the moon. The moon is gaining light, so it's gaining power, it's gaining energy. And so theoretically, so are we. We do have one aspect today, so that would be Venus opposing Mars. And this one's a funky one, especially because, like I said, Mars is... I mean, it's only been, like a little over a week since Mars stationed retrograde, so still very slow moving. And Venus is direct. Venus is not retrograde or stationary or anything like that. So Venus is kind of cruising along as she does, and making this opposition to Mars. So any kind of Venus-Mars aspect tends to be sexy or flirty or romantic, even harsh aspects like oppositions. Oppositions, I think, are actually, depending on how you look at it, they can be, I guess, romantic. Like an opposition, you're facing off. Venus and Mars, for instance, are they're sitting directly across from each other. They're looking right at each other. So that can be very contentious. Like that can almost be like two people in a ring, like about to fight. But on the other hand, it can also be two people, open to each other. Like that can be very romantic. Either way, it's very intense, I guess. So I feel like everything lately is just so double-sided. And keep in mind too, like Mercury is retrograde as I'm doing this forecast. It makes it a little bit more complicated to communicate these things. But anyway, with Venus opposing Mars, especially both in such kind of dramatic, strong-willed signs, they're in the fixed yang signs right now, Aquarius and Leo, for Venus and Mars respectively. So yeah, I really think that means that we're facing off with where's the pleasure? What are we ambitious about? What do we want? There might be a face-off there. We may have to make a trade-off, that we may be pulled in two different directions. If you personally have any placements around, 6 degrees, 5 or 6 degrees Aquarius or Leo, in one way or another, your ambition and your pleasure are being kind of highlighted, and you are actually very desirable right now yourself, but there's something clashing with you, or there's something facing off against you, if that makes sense. And if you don't have placements around those areas, it just means that it's almost like we're a little bit confused about what we want, I think. Mars in Leo wants to really just kind of, because it's retrograde, it really wants to just hone in on what we personally want. Like screw what everyone else wants. Let's just focus on, what I want. Sometimes that's necessary, but on the other hand, Venus is in Aquarius, showing that we want collaboration. We want to, it's the exact opposite. We want to kind of fit in with our community and be part of something bigger than ourselves. So again, it's very just opposite. We may have to choose one or the other. We may have to make some kind of compromise. But yeah, depending on your chart, this could also be an aspect that could, like I said, it could trigger something very romantic and fun and flirty and maybe sexual, or on the other hand, it could be like contentious. There could be tension there. Tension itself is not always bad. I think tension can actually lead to passion. So it really just kind of depends on how you look at it. Friday, December 13th. This is a little bit more harmonious. We're still in orb of that opposition between Venus and Mars. But now Mercury, because it's at 6 degrees Sagittarius, technically, so we have this kind of like imperfect trine that never precisely happens between Mercury and Mars, because Mercury is basically at this point, Mercury's preparing to station direct. So in other words, if Mercury had continued retrograde, it would make that exact trine to Mars. But because it's kind of stopping right now, it's a slightly it's pretty close. It's less than a degree from being exact. But anyway, my point is Mercury is simultaneously sextiling Venus as it basically trines Mars today. So it's really interesting. All three of these kind of inner solar system planets are aspecting each other right now. Mercury sextiling Mars, Mercury sextiling Venus, Mercury trining Mars, and then Venus and Mars opposing. So it's just kind of showing that when it comes to the communication, the pleasure, the ambition, all of these things are focused on yang signs. We're wanting to kind of break from the mold, do our own thing, communicate things in a really like fresh and unique way. And this is especially true because we're right on the precipice, we're right on the cusp of breaking out of this Mercury retrograde phase. So in other words, like, ideally through the last few weeks, we've really maybe slowed down or hopefully had time to like process a lot, gain some more insight, really kind of focus on our own like subconscious for a little bit. And now that we're almost coming out of that, it's like things are really ripe. Like we're reaching kind of like a tipping point, if that makes sense. But Mercury sextiling Mercury, I keep saying that. Mercury sextiling Venus is really excellent for having pleasant conversations. They are in semi kind of rambunctious signs with Mercury in Sagittarius, Venus in Aquarius. They're both a little bit out of place. Mercury's in detriment. Venus in Aquarius is just kind of like an awkward placement. But again, because they're sextiling, it shows that they are harmonious with one another. So I would just think that this would lead to some really interesting conversations today. Like it's really a mix. Like things are a little muddled. There is some kind of like pleasant sweetness there, yet at the same time there's also tension. It's really just a mixed bag. That's the best way I can put it. And it's almost like there's so much going on still beneath the surface, but it's kind of breaking out. It's ready to break out. That's the best way I can put it. Saturday, December 14th. I forgot to mention, so for Friday, Moon leaves Taurus and enters Gemini. So again, getting ever so closer to that full moon. This week's forecast is honestly fun, even though I'm kind of tripping and sputtering a lot. It is fun though, because you can see how things are building. Like we start out again with things just so contentious at the start of the week. Look at all those red lines. And even by Friday, there's more harmonious aspects. But again, we're also approaching the full moon, approaching Mercury direct. Things are starting to get much more exciting. So yeah, definitely a lot of fun. Anyway, Saturday, December 14th, moon continues trucking through Gemini, where it just entered on Friday. And so, we're well into moon being in the sign that it will be full. Technically, moon is not going to be quite full on Saturday, but it's super close. Moon's in Gemini, Sun in Sagittarius. They're kind of like taking their places on the stage. They're getting ready for this kind of battle, this opposition, or you could say it's kind of like a party in a way too. Again, it just kind of depends on how you look at it. No exact kind of like planetary aspects today, but we do have moon crossing over Jupiter though, and even that's weird. That would usually be a pretty simple aspect to talk about, but because Jupiter is in detriment and retrograde, Jupiter's not acting at all like itself. That luck and abundance is a little bit obscure right now, and it has been, especially since last month when Jupiter stationed retrograde. So how do I put this? Like, with moon crossing over Jupiter, we are becoming more aware of some kind of abundance or expansion, but it's not it's not an abundance or an expansion that is kind of in the traditional sense. It's more on an internal level. It's more subtle. It's more psychological. We may also be finding ways to expand through unusual means, like so through I don't know, something that no one else knows about. Like you're expanding through something in a very kind of private way, if that makes sense. That sounds really weird. I'm trying to phrase this the right way. It's just such a weird aspect. It's difficult to articulate. I don't know. Yeah, you are thriving in some kind of way, but it's probably in a way that no one else really knows about or maybe understands. You're thriving with something that you figured out on your own, if that makes sense. And that's true for everyone, each in their own way. That's what's so weird about these aspects. It's like, I mean, you could say this is always true, but especially lately, like we are going through the same things, yet at the same time, what that looks like is completely different for each person, because we're really like, I think we've really all gone on these like separate kind of side quests the last few weeks. We're really all just processing a lot with our own selves, if that makes sense, and having to figure out things for ourselves recently. So yeah, it's really strange. It's like, on the one hand, you could say, yeah, we're all going through this together and experiencing the same themes, but on the other hand, we're also all going through this very much on our own, very much individually, and both are true at the same time. Okay, the big day by far is Sunday, December 15th. So let's just cut to that. Quick side note, again, there's that weird kind of like imperfect trine that technically never happens between Mercury and Mars. Mercury is stationing direct, so it doesn't quite reach that point where it would exactly trine Mars, but they're close enough together that we can still definitely interpret that aspect. Mercury trining Mars would typically be great for getting stuff done, being productive. Mercury's kind of the energy of like busyness and errands and things like that, and Mars is the energy of ambition. So you typically combining them together would be just extremely productive and straightforward. However, again, because Mars is retrograde and Mercury's stationing direct, it's intense. This is really challenging me. On the one hand, like, yeah, it's not as productive in a kind of linear or straightforward way. Like, yeah, Mercury is direct, but it's stationary direct. It's basically not moving today. It hasn't built up steam or momentum yet. So things may not be moving like quite as fast as one might think. Really, this just indicates to me that we're at a turning point. So yeah, we're at a turning point where we're kind of rethinking, like, what do I truly want? What am I truly ambitious about? Like, where does my energy come from? What energizes me? We're really just at the beginning of processing those things, because Mars will be retrograde until February, okay? I believe. I will double check that and I'll let you know in the comments. But at any rate, Mars just went retrograde last week, so we're just beginning that process of figuring out what we truly want. So with Mercury trining Mars, we are focusing more on our ambitions, but we're not yet exactly sure what those are. Anyway, though, two major developments. So Mercury stationing direct at 6 degrees Sagittarius. Again, that just indicates we are at a turning point. Like, no more is the time for going within, and I really do think Mercury retrograde affects us more than any other retrograde. The others are definitely very potent. Mars retrograde is definitely tangible, but Mercury stationing direct, that's a big deal. It just shows that going forward, we are still going to be working on those same themes that we've been wrestling with for the last few weeks, but it's going to be in a much more simple, we're moving forward, right? Mercury's moving forward, we're going to be moving forward. So we are working with the same issues still, but in a way where we're moving forward, rather than the last few weeks we were kind of, going back, kind of digging stuff up, reprocessing things from the past. That is more or less over, if that makes sense. Now is time to apply what we've learned and move forward. Also today, full moon in Gemini at 23 degrees. This happens super early in the day, Eastern Standard Time, so depending on your time zone, it could be maybe like really late Saturday. Really, I would say it kind of occupies the whole weekend, but technically Sunday. So yeah, let's talk about the Sagittarius Gemini axis. So full moon at 23 Gemini, opposing sun at 23 Sagittarius. The Gemini Sagittarius axis is the mutable yang axis. So I would say Gemini and Sagittarius, more than any other signs, are kind of the most open to learning and exploring. They want to explore, they want to get out there, they want to have fun, but they also want new information. So they want to learn and they want to have fun. Really, in a lot of ways, Gemini and Sagittarius have a lot in common. So with both the luminaries kind of opposing each other in these signs, those are the themes. So this could be really fun full moon. It could also be a very academic or intellectual full moon as well. Gemini and Sagittarius are just open. They're open to any kind of new experience. Let's try something new. Let's experiment. Let's get out there. Let's get a little weird or a little silly. They're definitely not afraid to do any of that. I did want to mention... Well, I was going to say there's a T-square. I guess there's a T-square. I'm looking at my notes. I mean, kind of. We're still within orb of that. Like Saturn and Jupiter have been squaring each other all week, basically. This full moon is like somewhat close to that square. The full moon, is 10 degrees off from squaring Saturn. And only 8 degrees off from conjoining Jupiter. So it's kind of highlighting like a much larger tension that has been kind of, I don't know, mumbling around in the background. Mumbling's not the right word. What's like mumbling but stronger? Like aching, or I don't know. There's been this like huge source of contention in the background for many weeks now. So this full moon does kind of bring that up a little bit. Another thing too is that because we're experiencing this opposition between two mutable signs. Mutable signs are so scattered. They're very adaptable. They're versatile. They're multifaceted. So combining two of them in this opposition together, it can feel very scattered. So my advice would be look to the mutable signs. Mutable signs are flexible. They roll with the punches. That would be kind of the best thing to do on Sunday and even Saturday. Just, also kind of depending on your own astrology, but that would be, that's how you're going to make the most of this full moon, is by being flexible. And yeah, we don't even get through Sunday before moon actually leaves Gemini and enters Cancer. So that does kind of bring things down quite a bit. The moon is still pretty full. It still has a lot of light, but shifting into Cancer, a yin sign, much more feminine, much kind of cooler and heavier sign. I do think that will... It's almost like turning the lights off at a party. It's like, it's like, all right, let's shut it down. Let's bring it down, the energy a little bit. There's still that energy there to some extent, but it definitely like takes a nosedive, if that makes sense. Which, depending on how you look at it, that might be nice. We can kind of rest a little bit more after this spike in activity that we just experienced this weekend. So yeah, really dynamic week. We've gone through so much the last few weeks. But again, I really am happy to say that things look much lighter by the end of the week than where we started out from. But yeah, thanks so much for listening. I really hope this helps you. Tune in next week. Sun enters Capricorn, which means that we go through the winter solstice, and there's a third quarter moon. So lots to talk about as always. But thanks so much for listening. Have a great day.